Hey there, guitar fanatics. Today we're going to take a peek into the world of the legendary guitar wizard James Marshall Hendrix. Known forever to the music world as Jimmy, he was playing things 60 years ago that are still blowing minds today. The tones, the studio techniques and trickery, the larger-than-life stage persona, and the phenomenal lead and rhythm guitar playing that Jimmy left us with from his short time on Earth will continue to inspire guitarists as long as we play the instrument. And while a lot of what he did was pretty wild and psychedelic, today we're going to get into a big part of his sound that came from his blues and R&B background. And that is his use of double stops in his lead playing. So hang out here with me today and learn how to get some Jimmy into your playing. Like the video, subscribe to the channel. I'm Charlie Long. Let's play some guitar. So if you've listened to much Hendrix, along with the psychedelic and high energy playing that he did, you've probably heard him do stuff like this too. Jimmy made beautiful use of double stops in his playing. And in contrast to his more bombastic and psychedelic sounds, these double stop lines were usually just dripping with melody and soul. I can remember being just fascinated by these type of lines and wondering how he could move them around the fretboard with such ease. I know I'm not the only one because you hear a lot of his stuff in the playing of Stevie Ray Vaughan and in the present day in the playing of John Mayer. What I'm going to show you today, that the trick to playing these types of double stop lines really revolves around taking a couple of chord shapes and a couple of pentatonic patterns and harmonizing them with some hammer-ons and pull-offs. So if you can get these down, you're going to be on your way to having some of that Jimmy thing in your playing. So the first chord shape that we're going to look at is this one that should be familiar to everyone, and it's this major chord shape. We're barring the same fret on the E and B strings. The root note is at the 3rd fret of the E string. So if we played at the 3rd fret, that's a G chord. And then I've got a B note at the 4th fret of the G string, and then another G note at the 5th fret of the D string. So we're going to take this simple chord and use it as a basis for creating some lead phrases. We're just going to embellish the chord tones with other notes around them. So let's start by hammering on and pulling off the A note at the 5th fret while we're also playing the D at the 3rd fret of the B string. So there's our first double stop and hammer on and pull off. Next, we're going to play the double stop of D and G at the 3rd fret of the B and E strings, and we're going to hammer on and pull off the 5th fret of the B string. And we're going to follow that up with a hammer on to the 5th fret of the G string. That note is a C note, and it's a really cool note because it functions as the suspended 4th. We've all heard that sound. That puts a little tension into the sound. So here we've got so far. And then after the C, and that C is still ringing, we could play that D note again. This is really important. Letting those notes ring together is a big part of this sound. And so make sure you're playing the notes cleanly and you can hear all the notes sustaining. Now to finish off this phrase, we're going to shift slightly down a fret. Our index finger is at the 2nd fret of the G string, middle finger's at the 3rd fret of the B string. So that note at the 2nd fret of the G string is an A. That's the 2nd of G. And here's what's so brilliant about these little patterns. We go from a suspended 4th sound with the C in the first part of the lick, and then we go right to a suspended 2nd sound with that A note. So I'm playing the double stop. I've got an A and a D. I'm going to resolve that by hammering onto the B note at the 4th fret of the G string. That's the major 3rd of G. So learning to use tension and resolution is critical to being the best musician you can be. And it's built right into these licks for you. So very cool. So after we hammer onto that B, we play it a couple of more times, and we're going to end that first phrase by playing the double stop of B and D at the 4th fret of the G string and the 3rd fret of the B string, pulling off to A, and hammering onto the G note at the 5th fret of the D string. Put all of that together, we've got something like this. Now, let's stretch out that lick by incorporating another move that Jimi did all the time in his rhythm analeads, and that's to find the first inversion of the chord that we're playing and do some harmonizing around that. So a first inversion is where instead of playing the root of the chord on the bottom, like this G power chord, we're going to play the 3rd of the chord on the bottom. So if I take my G power chord and I switch the bass note to B here at the 7th fret, I get this sound. So I've got a B in the bass, here's a D, here's another G on top. So if I bar the 5th fret of E, A, and D, and then hammer onto the B at the 7th fret of the E string, you can hear that Hendrixy sound again. So with our index finger staying at the 5th fret of the D and G strings, we're going to play that double stop and hammer on and pull off the 7th fret of the D string. Move down to the A and D strings, both at the 5th fret, and we're going to make the same move. And then we're going to hammer on to the 8th fret of the E string. That's our sus4 again, and as before, make sure the notes are ringing into each other. And finish it off by playing the 5th fret of the E, A, and D strings and hammering onto the 7th fret of that low E. Put it all together and we've got this. Here's the second lick. Here's the 2 licks combined. So now we've created a nice long, very Jimi sounding double stop line by combining 2 chord shapes, and that was this G major shape on the top 4 strings and G major first inversion on the bottom 3 strings. Let's go to another familiar shape and harmonize that into double stops. So this next shape is actually the first pattern of minor pentatonic or 5th pattern of major pentatonic, however you want to think about it. Sticking with our G major chord for now, we're going to be playing E minor or G major pentatonic at the 12th fret, this pattern. So let's jimmy that up by playing a descending lick starting at the 15th and 12th frets of the high E and B strings. Now comes our double stops, and we're going to play the 12th fret on the E string and the 13th fret of the B string and pull off to fret 12 of the B string. The next double stop is fret 12 on the B string and 14 on the G string. We pull off to fret 12 of the G string. Play the same frets on the G and G string, but after pulling off to fret 12 of the D string, we're also going to hammer on to fret 15 of the A string. The last part of this phrase is the double stop at fret 12 of the D string and fret 14 of the A string. We're going to pull off to fret 12 of the A string and then hammer on to fret 15 of the low E. Now we can create a whole new lick out of that pattern by incorporating both a hammer-on and pull-off into each double stop. That's something that Jimi did all the time. So let's start at the 12th frets of the B and E string. We're going to hammer on and pull off to fret 13 of the B string. Move to the G and B strings, fret 12, hammer on, pull off, fret 14 of the G string. Move to the D and G strings, fret 12, we're going to hammer on and pull off, fret 14 of the D string. Lastly, go to the A and D strings, fret 12, hammer on and pull off on fret 14 of the A string, ending with a hammer on to the fret 15 of the E string. Let's use that last lick to create another new lick, and all we're going to do differently is hammer onto a note on the next string after each double stop, hammer on and pull off. So we do our double stop on the E and B strings and then hammer on to fret 14 of the G string. we do our B and G string hammer-on, and then we play 14 of the D string, G and D strings, and then hammer on to fret 15 of the A string. Finish up with the double stop on the A and D strings, and then hammer on to fret 15 of the low E. So now we've got a few variation of double stop licks in that same position, and we're even going to take it one step further. So what we're going to do next is play the entire pentatonic scale in double stops. And we do that by simply playing the notes of the pentatonic scale 2 strings at a time. For instance, for E minor pattern 1, we've got an E at the 12th fret and a G at the 15th fret of the low E. On the A string, we've got A at the 12th fret and B at the 14th fret. So our first 2 double stops would be E and A and G and B. Move that across the whole pattern, we get this. We could also extend the pattern by starting with the double stop at frets 10 of the E and A string. And on the high E and B strings, playing the double stop at fret 17. Now we can make up some really great licks by combining our harmonized pentatonic with some of our pull-off and hammer-on double stops. How about something like this? Now, there's a couple of other chord shapes that we really need to take a look at. The first is the major chord shape for G up at the 7th fret, and it looks like this. A very important Jimi-ish lick to learn around that chord shape is this one. We're going to play the double stop at fret 7 of the G string and 8 of the B string, and then hammer on pull off to fret 9 of the G string. Play fret 10 of the D string, and then the double stops at fret 7 of the D and G string, followed by hammer on and pull off of fret 9 of the D string. We're going to finish the phrase with a hammer on to fret 10 of the A string. And a very Jimmy thing to do would be to add the double stop at the 7th fret of the D and G strings, and then hammer on to fret 9 of the D string twice. Another major chord shape that can serve as a springboard to some great licks is the major chord shape with the root on the 5th string, sort of the bar chord, power chord. For G, it would be up at the 10th fret, this chord. Now, the reason it's such a handy shape, it flows right into that E minor pentatonic pattern 1 if we go into the first inversion of the G chord by sliding from the A note at the 12th fret up into the B note at the 14th fret. Now I've got my first inversion, and that gives us all our little hammer-on and pull-offs, and it gives us our harmonized pentatonic double stops. We can also start at the high E and B strings at playing the 10th fret of each and hammer on to fret 12 of the B string. Pull off to the 10th fret and then hammer onto the G at the 12th fret of the G string. And that sets us up to play right down all of our little hammer-on and pull-off patterns like this. Okay, you might be wondering, all of this stuff is major so far. What can we play over a minor chord? And here's the awesome thing about these patterns is they also work really, really well over the relative minor of the major chord we've just been playing. So instead of playing over G, let's play over E minor now. How about up at the 12th fret? All of our little hammer-on pull-off patterns work great over that E minor. The harmonized pentatonic also works great over E minor. Let's drop down to the 7th fret and play the E minor chord shape there. On the B and E strings, we're playing frets 8 and 7. We're going to hammer on and pull off to the 10th fret of the B string. Play frets 7 and 8 of the G and B strings, and we're going to hammer on and pull off to the 9th fret of the G string. Play fret 7 of the D and G string, hammer on, pull off to fret 9 of the D string, followed by a hammer on to fret 10 of the A string. Play fret 7 of the A and D string. We're going to hammer on and pull off to the 9th fret of the A string, followed by a hammer on to the 10th fret of the low E. We could go all the way back to the first patterns we learned down at the 3rd fret. So take those patterns that we played over G major, we'll make sure to resolve them to an E note instead of ending on a G, and we'd get something that sounds like this. So now we've got a bunch of patterns made up of hammer-ons and pull-offs that we can use over both major and minor chords. While I feel like we've only started to scratch the surface, we've already got a network of licks that we can use to weave up and down over the entire fretboard. Check out how we can move this stuff all around the neck. So practice this stuff in all of the positions. Concentrate on learning where the root notes are in sort of the home positions for each of our patterns. That's really going to help you be able to play these things in other keys. Play these licks over all kinds of different backing tracks so you can work out your phrasing and your timing. These double stops, they aren't hard to play, but they do sound really slick and sophisticated. Get them down and you'll be sounding like Jimmy, SRV, John Mayer, and countless other blues rock greats. Thanks for checking out the video. Do me a favor by liking the video, subscribing to the channel. You're going to get more guitar goodness every week. Work hard, play hard, have fun, never stop learning. Bye.